Hello. Today I'd like to do a walkthrough of the installation of the PrintSortDrawings app. First, let's start by reviewing the documentation. If we look at the PDF explaining the installation and basic operation and go to page 2, the first thing we'll see are the basic requirements. You need to have Windows XP or higher. On Windows XP or Server 2003, you're going to need to make sure you have the .NET 4.0 platform installed. XP is no longer supported, as you know, so if you don't already have this done, getting the files might be difficult. But if you're already set up and you're already running report services and viewing reports on XP, you'll probably be fine. You need to have Adobe Acrobat Reader or the Acrobat full version installed and operational. You need to be logged on as the administrator in order to do the installation. You have to have the ability to connect to the Max database from the workstation that you're on. You need to have the rights with your login to create, drop, and execute in that database for the installation only. After that, you only need rights to select and update on the database. CLR types need to be enabled on the SQL Server, and you need to have SQL Server report services configured and running. And this is assuming you're using 2012 version. Of course, if you're not going to run any reports, none of this is necessary. And you need access to a drive with read and write rights. You're going to need to be making some files and temporary files, and you need to have guaranteed access to be able to read and write these files at all times. And in your document link table in the database, the paths need to be correct and valid for the workstation that you're on. Before you can complete the configuration, you also have to have the printers pre-configured for the page sizes that you're going to print. If you have drawings that require legal and ledger size paper and you've elected not to scale drawings down to letter size, you're going to need printers pre-set up for those sizes. For the first time installation, we're going to go through these steps. We're going to show where you could optionally load a pre-written configuration file. We're going to enter the server name and login information, set the folder for the created zip files and temp files, enter the admin password for the application to gain access to the configuration tabs, and then we're going to start by saving the configuration on the server in the database for whatever company we're working with, and start by adding some collections. And by collections, I mean groups of reports and drawings that are related to some number that you entered. Then we're going to configure some reports, configure the printers, and finally test run a collection. Let's get started with the installation by going ahead and clicking the MSI shortcut. I recommend accepting all the defaults. So we're going to go ahead and install the C program files, x86 in this case, and do it for just a particular user. So we're going to go ahead and allow changes to be made. And now we should have an icon for the application. Now that we have an icon for the application, let's go ahead and click it and get things set up. This first prompt is for an existing configuration file for logins. We don't have such a thing, so we're going to go ahead and cancel and then the login screen will be brought up to manually enter the information. Up here we want to put our server name, which is required. Choose our authentication type. I'm using SQL Server authentication, so I'll need my username and password. And then we want to test the connection, and if everything's successful, we'll be able to proceed. This message indicates that we have no collections. Now, if you remember, a collection is a group of drawings and reports that are going to be generated at once that are somehow related to each other. This makes sense because we're starting the program for the first time. Next we'll be prompted for the location of our output file or output folder. This is where all of the zip files and temporary files built running the application are going to be stored. I suggest to store it on a local drive where you're guaranteed to have read and write access and no one else will be naming files the same thing you could be naming them. Suggested location I say is C PrintSortDrawings. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new folder on C. Called PrintSortDrawings. Now this is the main screen for the app. You can see that these two boxes are grayed out. This is where you would save a new collection. This is where you would delete one. And you can't get to any of these tabs. That's because the common user would only use this screen. We're going to need to be an administrator, so we go up and click the admin button and put in the password, which is max admin. And it's not case sensitive. Now you can see all these buttons are active and these tabs are selectable. So the first thing we'll do is put together a collection. So we'll go into the tab and say add new collection. The first one that we want to do is a shop packet based on orders. So up in the box we'll name it. And now we'll select the source that this is going to derive from, which is going to be the order number, is what we'll be entering here. We're not going to select a range, it's only one number. We don't want to scale all the drawings to 8.5 by 11 paper, so we'll leave that unchecked. And we want to generate reports whether or not there's a drawing valid. So we'll uncheck the box. This is selectable afterwards for every collection, so we don't need to select it. So we should be done here where we can say save all. Now if we look in the collections, go back out and go in again. Now we have shop packet based on order. Let's go ahead and select that. Now the next thing that we want to do are add some reports to it and configure the printers. Let's go work on the reports next. We'll go to the Config Reports tab. I'm sorry, we have to log back in as admin, since we restarted. Alright, we'll go to the Config Reports tab. And you have to keep in mind this is only for whatever company is showing in here. This is the company that was determined from the registry to be the last one run. There may be others available. In this case, there's another one available. This is the first thing to configure. This is the report server URL. It has to be exactly correct or the reports won't function. My report server is going to require authentication to render the forms, so I'm going to need to put in my name, password, and domain or computer name. If you're using Windows authentication and you're able to render reports without being asked for password, you probably won't need to do this. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do are add some reports to the pool of available reports. Adding reports is fairly easy. The first step is to go down into the available reports grid and right-click and say Add a Report. You're going to need to put a display name for the report. We'll call the first one Pick List A. And these have to be unique. And then we put in our report folder, which happens to be Shop Floor. This is the folder the report resides in on the server. And then we have to put the exact name of the report in. This is the name of the RDL file. You can put the RDL there if you want, or you can just put the name without it. It will generate it. So now you can see we have one report available. Let's go ahead and add the others that we're going to want to use. So now we've added 4 reports to the pool of reports that we could use in the collections. Now that we've added these reports, we want to make them available in this particular collection according to the spec we were using. So this spec calls for all 4 of these reports to be available, and reports 1, 3, and 4 automatically selected for you when you call up the packet. So let's go ahead and select this row by left clicking in that box. And then we'll right click and say assign report. What this is going to do is call on the server. The server should determine what parameters are available for this report and populate all the boxes. Sometimes we might have to be a bit on the patient side if the server's just waking up for the first report. But eventually, if the report name's correct and your URL and login information are correct, we should see the report appear here. This box here indicates whether it'll be selected by default. We want this one selected by default, so that's okay. And then we see down here that there is one parameter in this report that can be set. And parameters can be set two different ways. One, they could be set dynamically, which means they're somehow related to the value you put in the box for the collection. Or they could be static if the report's ready to run on its own. Say it's a report for a certain day, we just might need to have one value put in. Or some others might be fixed, like the company name. And we might want to have that be a static value that's the database name. In this case, we have one parameter that's the order number. So we'll highlight it and we'll edit it. We want the order number set dynamically by checking this box, and we have different values it could be set to. In this case, order number or part number. This is the order number. So we'll select order number and say done editing. Let's go to the next report, and we'll assign it. Okay, we see here we don't want this one selected by default. We have a parameter called order number. We'll edit it, set it dynamically to order number. Let's go ahead and assign the last two reports. Bill of materials report has one variable. We'll go ahead and set it dynamically, only this time we're going to set it to part number. And we want it selected by default. And the last one that's available is routing. We'll assign that report. And if we look, again, we have one variable. Set it dynamically to part number. And let's go ahead and save everything. Now it's time for us to move on to the printers. The printers are valid for all the collections. So one of the things that's important is to make sure that by the time you get to this point that you have all the available printers you'll need to print the different size drawings that you could have. This application is capable of doing letter, legal, and ledger size drawings. I only have printers available for letter and legal. I don't have a printer for ledger. If you want to print drawings of that size, because you do not have it set to scale down the letter size, you'll need a printer configured for ledger as well. These can all be the same printer, just multiple copies set up with the default conditions being the paper that you want to have in them when Adobe goes to print all the files. So we're going to go ahead and set up a letter and legals. So I'm going to click the row to select it, and I'm going to come over here and say I want this to be letter and portrait orientation and add it. I'm also going to add it in as the landscape because it should automatically detect. I'm going to come down to the next one and select it for legal size and legal size landscape. And again, I'm going to go ahead and save. Now, one of the last key things that can be done is to come into the Configure app, and I want to move the configuration file into the database on the server so that I don't have to set it up for everybody separately. And I'm going to assume that everyone at the company is going to be using the same values, which basically means if it's a shared printer, we just have to name it the same thing and set it up on each of the workstations. All the rest of it should be valid for anyone that can log into the database. The first thing to do is check this box here to enable storing the configuration on the server. The first time you check this box is where you need to have the create, drop, and execute rights, because it will make a table in the Max database. The next thing we need to do is add the configuration file to that table. And I'm going to go ahead and add the configuration file for whatever's configured in this panel down here, all users. So add or update the users shown in the panel with the current configuration. You could do other things, like if you were provided a pre-configured file, you could import that. We don't have that. We've just made our file by changing these settings ourselves. So we're going to go ahead and add this. Now, if we look, right now the configuration source is a local file stored in our local app directory. Let's go ahead and close the app and open it again and see if it recognizes it from the server. If we look now, it's opened up and recognizes the configuration source from the server. Since we're all set with the central configuration file, and we should have our collection, and we have our valid reports, we should be able to enter an order number and go ahead and generate a packet. So let's do that, and we'll put in a valid order number. We'll select the output format for the testing to be a zip file. And we'll go ahead and load the data. What will happen is it will pull the drawings first and list the reports here and then attempt to render them. We can see the progress for the rendering in this bar. Since I'm taking a video on this computer at the same time as rendering, it may be slower than at your actual facility. But if everything works and all the paths for the drawings are valid in the document link table, we should see that the valid should read exists for all of them. And what we've done is we've built 1, 2, 3 reports in the temporary location that we set up, which is listed here. And we have one drawing. This drawing is scaled because we see that it's named scaled. So it's not the original document link name, and it's also stored in that folder. It's scaled to the maximum size that the application allows, which is ledger. If we look over here, this will show where these are going to be printed. These were all letter paper, so they're going to be printed on our default paper for letter. I don't have a default printer for ledger, so these would not be printed. They will be saved to the zip file, however. So we'll go ahead and say process. And we're being asked here for the name of our zip file. I'll call this the part number or the order number that I entered plus shop packet, which is the name of the collection, and say save. If everything worked, we should be able to go back and look in that location and we do see a zip file, and let's go ahead and look and see what's in it. We have two folders within the zip file. One contains the reports, the other contains the drawings. So if we look at the reports, we have 3 reports. Let's take a look at one of these. And this is a sample bill of material report, just to show that it works and it takes the parameters. So it's based on part number 1000, which is tied in with that order number, and then this shows the components. So all of your SSRS reports are rendered here ready to print, and in the drawings folder is the scaled drawing. If we look at that, we see a scaled drawing that's going to print. If we look at the properties, it's 11 by 17 inch page size. So it's going to print in ledger like we intended. If the scale to letter size was selected when this collection was set up, it would have been scaled down to fit on regular paper, but the drawing might be too small to read in some cases. So that's a quick demonstration of how to get things set up and operational.